Some are missing.
Well, our minds are set elsewhere, right? Like, is everybody here?
Yes.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to bring Kate and Jim back to the class. Is everybody here?
No, sorry.
Okay. Everybody should have this. The old one has been revised. Everybody should have a note card. If you don't, Brenda will give you one. I'll tell you what that's for in a second. Okay? Everybody should have a pen. This is the class on wisdom. What is it? Where do we find it? It's the final class. And this is where we're going to try and bring everything together. Now, how many people here have heard of blue zone living?
Living?
Has everybody heard of blue zone living?
No, living.
No. Okay. So, Joni, what is blue zone living?
I believe it's where people that live in a certain country live a very long life.
Very long life. Anything else about blue zone living? Happy life. Anything else?
Content.
Content. Anything else?
Healthy.
Healthy. Anything else?
Knowledgeable.
Okay. Active lives. They're very, very active people. There was this guy who, at the age of 60, was Greek. And at the age of 60, he discovered he had cancer. And the doctor said, you have at the most 10 or 12 years to live. So he thought to himself, you know, I'm final stages of life, where do I want to spend my life? So he said, well, I'll go back to my village in Greece. Turns out it is one of these places, 6 or 7 of them, where people live very long and contented lives. So now, this New York Times reporter is interviewing him. He is 94 years old. I mean, I've read this story in a book. He's 94 years old. And this reporter is asking him, how do you live? He said, well, I live a natural life. I grow my own vegetables. I raise my own chickens. I have a lot of close friends. And because it's mountainous, I climb these hills every day. I'm 94 years old. So this reporter says, well, what does your doctor say? He says, the doctor's dead. So we are going to talk not just about blue zone living, but we are going to talk about blue zone living plus wisdom.
So before you start that, I have a basic question on that.
Yep.
And that is, how does one incorporate this blue zone living,
All that.
wisdom and all of that? What partly comes at a time in terms of your interest as a human being.
Yes.
When you're not making a living.
That's right.
And very active and
Right.
caught up in your day to day.
Right.
Especially the more talented you are, the more likely you are to be caught up in that
Yeah.
worldly stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you get into a blue zone during that phase of your life?
When you're active and working and all of that, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And you're bombarded with all these
What?
negativities of politics
Yes.
and this and that,
Right.
and trying to make a living and
So,
feed your children
blue
and all
zone
that.
living in the real world.
In the
right?
real world, yes.
In the real world. Thank you. Real and I say imperfect world,
Absolutely.
right? I mean, there's so many things coming at us,
No one's gonna argue.
right? Imperfect world. How do we do this? Okay? So, my section of this talk today, which is about 45 minutes, is on precisely this topic. This is all I'm going to talk about. How to bring wisdom into the real world, into the business world, into teams, into personal, into family conflict, into every little minute, mundane part of our life. That's what this thing is all about, because otherwise this whole thing is theoretical. So thank you. But this is what I will talk about. And I'll get into substantial detail, give some techniques on how to do it. But we have to remember something, that if we are to do this and learn how to do this, we have to have two things. And one of those things is what? Anybody remember?
An open mind?
Open mind. So that is called Shraddha. That is two things. Open, can you read this? Open mind. And the other thing is, there's two parts to the Shraddha. Positive. Positive mind. Both those things are important. Open to what? Open to receiving new input and open to discovering our full potential. This is a different thing. We think we are already at our full potential. We are far from it. To discovering and positive is having a general positive outlook on life in any situation. This 104-year-old woman, 104, you're not in. She was asked, what is the best part of being 104? She said, no peer pressure. Okay, in any situation, looking at the positive. So we are going to get into blue zone living, and in the real world, to have an open mind, we have to remove all the preconditions that we have, the way that we look at the world. We have to take off our
Rose-colored
sunglasses and put on our regular glasses. Larry Prusak.
But,
So Larry, about 15 minutes to sum up. Yeah.
According to the Hindu philosophy, these 4 stages of life,
Yes.
brahmacharya. So the stage of renunciation
Yes.
is the blue zone.
No, all the blue zone is all throughout. This is what I was saying.
Yeah.
This is the key question. So we will talk about what is called karma yoga. We'll get into all that. How to be in the blue zone at all the time. So we will come to that.
But
So
when we have so many desires, how can you live in blue zone?
you will see by the end of this class, you'll be in a blue zone.
So, I'm going to talk about 2 things. One, Dilip asked me, and I think it's a good idea, just to summarize what I've been saying. It's 2 parts. And I wanted to talk about another subject, which I do a lot of research on, and really ties into this. It ties into what Dilip talked about too, which is stories and narratives. Years and years ago, about 20 years ago, I was invited to a conference on stories, and how we live our life and how it affects economics. It was a Swedish school. Yeah,
Do you
you
mind
can't.
moving kind of
No,
to the
okay, I'll
center?
do it. This was at the Swedish School of Economics, and they, no, that's okay.
Please get the chair for
They asked people, they woke people up in the middle of the night. It's an interesting thing. They got our approval and say, what are you? This is the thing. And the women generally tend to say relationship things, wives, mothers, and stuff. And the men would say their jobs. But then we began to talk, and there's now a tremendous amount of research. People are all on narrative and stories. All of us lead our life as a story. You're enacting a story. You may not know it. You may not think you are, but you are. You can't live without doing that. Because how would you know what to do the next day? We all enact stories, narratives. So a famous English columnist, G.K. Chesterton, said, when people say they don't believe in God, it doesn't mean they don't believe in anything. You can't go through life without believing in something. And what most people believe in is their own story. Another philosopher, Alistair Mathur, said that if you want to know what someone's going to do the next day, see what story they're living. All of us are living these stories. You may not think so, but you are. And it's very much tied to wisdom. And so what the Leaf is saying, if your story is, the world is really terrible and I'm going to be as terrible as the world to get ahead, it's a story you're living. You can change the story. So it's not that easy. Reflection is a way to say, well, what story am I living in? I'll give you a real, I mean, there's so many examples of this. This is a subject that's getting into economics and the social sciences big time. Something that was ignored for 300 years. It's amazing how subjects. So we live, Dilip and I, there's a few people that live in a town called Lexington, Massachusetts. It's an upper middle class suburb that is full of lawyers and consultants and academics. Sort of an intellectual place, there's no other way to put that. It's very expensive. We couldn't move there if I didn't live there now. It's a very expensive town. You can get the same house as you can in Lexington. There are two towns that adjoin it. One is called Waltham, one is called Mathur. But those houses would cost half as much money. Why do people choose to spend twice as much on Lexington? I mean, there may be better schools, but it's not just that. It's the story. People who are professors at MIT want to say they're living in Lexington. It's the story they're enacting. I am a well-known intellectual. I have a prestigious job. This is where people like me live. It's a story. It has no basis necessarily in objective reality. You can get a house just as good for half the price, but people don't do it. None of them do it. It's absolutely unknown. Your identity is wrapped up in the story you're telling. Who you are, your identity. I'm an intellectual. The Dilip is, I'm a mother. I'm this, I'm that, I'm retired. It's all stories. Now that's just the way we live. There's no other way to live. But you can change your story. You're not doomed, we're not dead. I certainly don't believe in any of that stuff. There's a great deal of, no other way to say that, sort of reductionism in explaining human behavior. Everyone's desperate for scientific answers. So it's all neurophysiology. It's all in the genes. It's all in your neurons. This is just crap. Don't believe it. There's enough free will. I mean, we're all, my hair's not going to grow back. Maybe it will, but it's, your side. There's a lot of things that are somewhat determined by who your parents were and so forth. But it doesn't really matter that much. You're still free. I think so. Dilip thinks so. Many of us think so. Someone once said that the three biggest influences on your life, the three biggest, you have no control over whatsoever. Where you're born, when you're born, and who your parents were. Which is true. You have no control. But that doesn't mean you don't have control on what story you're telling. It doesn't mean you can't live one type of life rather than another. You can't choose to be generous rather than miserly. You can't choose to be decent. There's enough latitude. Karl Marx said that man makes his own history, but not on the stage that he set. Very wise thing. Very good line. It's true. We make our own history, but we didn't set the stage. And some of us, in this room actually, all of us are somewhat the same age. Certain exceptions, my wife. No, I mean in a nice way. People younger here. We were born in a very, very good time. If you're born during or after World War II, the U.S. economy exploded, so everyone's angry now because it's regressed. But my parents, born, who lived through the Great Depression of the 30s, had a very different outlook on things. So it influences you. But again, you're free to reflect. So that's about stories. Think of the story you're living. Think of the story. And not only do we have stories, but countries have national narratives. The United States is having tremendous problems because there's very different stories people think to explain this country. Wildly different. So I read things. I actually, for the first time in my life, I almost couldn't read the newspaper today. Since I was a boy, I always read the paper in the morning. It's actually got so disgusting, I almost couldn't read it. Wow, that's really a first. I'm just getting older. But these big national narratives, some of them, to my mind, are putrid. They're really extremely awful. And then so those people think, many of us like that. So getting into trouble, these big, and their stories. They're all narratives. They're not based on science. They're not based on what's best for people. They're just stories. Not just, but it's the dominating factor in the lives of people. Even all of us live stories. It's just think about it. Think about it. It's a very useful way to understand things. On that note, the Leap asked me to sort of summarize what we've been saying, what I've been saying so much about wisdom, though it certainly overlaps with a lot of the things the Leap is saying. Here's the best wisdom of all. Don't get older. Yes, don't get older. There's not much in it. Glasses. Really, trust me. I guess all of you should get a little thought on that subject.
What is the alternative?
Well, I don't know. Give it some thought. So if I had to summarize like 5 things, 5 or 6 points I wanted to make. One is that wisdom is social. You're not wise alone. You're wise with your tribe. You're wise in your group. You're wise with your network. You're wise with your community. But you're not wise alone. That's another great story we live by. I'm an individual. I remember our Senator, Elizabeth Warren, made the mistake, or she was very active, to say, listen, these real wealthy people who say, I did everything myself, that's just crap. They're workers. We're educated in the schools that we pay for, the roads they get set, and everyone denounced, oh no, it's all individualism. It's completely a lie. But it's a story, different sort of stories. You're not wise alone. No one is. Wisdom can be found everywhere. Don't think we all have to be Mandelas or Gandhis. We're not going to be. They're not born that often. They were. It'd be nice to have a few more. But it can be found everywhere. Your grandmother, a child, a great book, a song, a slogan. Wisdom is where you find it, and you can find it everywhere. Epistemic humility. Don't think what you know is the absolute truth. I don't think there is absolute truth, and what's more, if there is, we don't know it yet. Be humble. Have some humility. Think, do I really know that? Is that really true? Everyone thought, I mean, I could give you a zillion of examples of what was absolutely true. You just read a little history. You're absolutely certain about something that gets blown up by one thing or the other. Live in the shadow of the future. Not the past, but the future. Think about what you're doing. How will it affect the future? Future of your country, your community, your grandchildren. Keep that in mind. It really is a good way to be wise. Keep in mind, live in the shadow of the future. Be empathic. Be empathic. I was talking to Dilip and Estelle about how when Sonia Sotomayor is being vetted for the Supreme Court Justice, Obama. Sorry. It's actually, that phone call is about a woman who's hired by the Department of State, to try to change the stories that people in the Middle East tell each other about how the world is structured. We're going to do some consulting in that area. It's so crazy. I want to ask me another time. Anyway, when Sonia was being confirmed, it was fascinating. They said, Obama said, I want an empathic judge. And everyone jumped in. No, there shouldn't be empathy in the courts. This was the craziest thing I had ever heard. You shouldn't have empathic judges. I mean, it was so, no, we won't go into it, but be empathic. Be open-minded. I'm not going to talk about that any more than what Dilip talks about it, but he's absolutely right. There's probably no greater road to wisdom than having an open mind. As best you can. We're all sort of somewhat how we grew up, the networks we're in, the communities we're in. But try to be open-minded. I mean, it's very hard to do it. I was thinking, I was reading this book by Amy Chua at Yale about tribes. And it's a very good book. She's talking about try to listen to other people. If I was a father of one of those children who were killed, it'd be very, very hard for me to listen to someone defending them, giving machine guns to crazy teenage boys. I mean, I really would have a lot of trouble not trying to kill them. Really. I mean, it's hard, in all honesty. So, see things clearly. Do your damnedest to see things clearly. I mean, we're all blinded. We're all, Plato talked about, we're in the cave. We're all Plato's cave where he talked about sort of feeling things, and it's always shadows. Who knows what the real reality is? That's very close to Indian thought. sometimes I don't know the answer, but sometimes I think there must have been some way, some of the thinking of